Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. This is an early morning emergency alert video for you today. Forgive me in advance if I'm a little incoherent. I just rolled out of bed, but this information is too important for me to not share. I'm getting a variety of signals from numerous data sources from which I aggregate info that we're about to provide license to do something monumentally stupid in Ukraine that is going to bring us past the nuclear Rubicon. I'm just going to lay out all the data points and you can come to your own conclusions. The two knuckleheads you see behind me here are Lindsey Graham, he's a Republican senator, and Richard Blumenthal, a Democratic senator. They're proposing a bipartisan resolution that would see the immediate invocation of Article 5 should there be a radiological incident in Ukraine. Now we know if there is a radiological incident in Ukraine, whether it's in the form of something happening at the nuclear power plant or the detonation of a nuclear weapon, it will be blamed on the Russians, regardless of who actually does it. We know that because these are the two guys who still believe that Russia blew up Nord Stream in spite of mounting evidence to the contrary, evidence that has been even floated by, the likes of the New York Times and other pro-Western news agencies, okay? So we know that if any radiological incident happens, it's going to be blamed on the Russians regardless of who does it. Now, what concerns me most is the nonverbal communication that was present in this statement, as well as the broader context that this has been brought up in. Because these two guys have tried to do this same thing in the past. I think last September they did something similar, where they wanted to get a resolution that would see the immediate involvement in NATO if there was a similar incident. What concerns me more is the broader context. Just a couple months ago, you had U.S. specialists sent to Ukraine to put down sensors throughout the country that would pick up radiation from a radiological incident. There's been increasing rhetoric surrounding this, including and more recently from the Zelensky regime. Zelensky himself in the last 48 hours has brought it up numerous times that he feels as though the Russians are preparing something at the nuclear power plant. They're talking about the nuclear power plant being mined. Now, why would they be talking about this? Of course, this is going to be in the pathway of the current counteroffensive. So eventually, there's going to be fighting at this place. Now, the International Atomic Energy Agency has not corroborated the claim that the Russians have in fact mined the nuclear power plant itself, the surrounding regions, and yes, indeed, the Russians are using it as a nuclear shield of sorts in the same way that you use human shields, because of course, if they were to draw the fire of the Ukrainians, then they would blame the Ukrainians for whatever nuclear incident arose. The IAEA is saying that we don't have any evidence to suggest that they've actually mined the power plant itself. In spite of this, both Zelensky and his intelligence coordinator have said that they believe they have evidence that this is about to happen, okay? What are the other data points to consider? Well, the Ukrainians are currently doing more CBRN radiological training. They recently put out a full-scale draft notice. Any able-bodied men who are left in the country from 18 to 65 must report to an enlistment office in the next 10 days. So clearly the counteroffensive is probably not going as well as they're making out. So if this is the plan to bring NATO into the war, because when you see the language of Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal, you can tell that they're dead set on trying to bring NATO into this conflict and that this is a veiled threat. It seems more of a veiled threat to Russia, that if you continue in your counteroffensive operations, that is, if our counteroffensive is not successful in a conventional sense, there will be a radiological incident that would invoke Article 5, because we would see that as an attack on NATO, because the radiological dust cloud or whatever will blow over into NATO countries, and an attack against one is an attack against all. That's what Article 5 is. This would bring NATO into the war, and the aggressive language that is used by Senator Lindsey Graham and Blumenthal in this statement is just off the charts. Now, it's not out of the ordinary, as I say, because Lindsey Graham is the same guy who says that they should assassinate Vladimir Putin. Of course, that would mean the immediate use of nuclear weapons. That would be considered an existential threat to Russia. But in the broader context, we have the Ukraine mobilization. We have a lot of military activity in Belarus, a mobilization exercise. In fact, you have the NATO exercise, the largest airborne exercise ever conducted, currently in the process of wrapping up. You have just copious amounts of military activity in the surrounding countries, including training for this exact incident in places like Romania. You have this stalled counteroffensive. You have, I'm sure there's numerous other things I'm forgetting. You have the nuclear weapons that have been recently rolled out in Belarus. You have the deployment of the new Sarmat systems and the new underwater submersible drone nuclear systems that Russia is about to float, no pun intended. And it all points towards this is our backup plan, okay? And that they're going to do something really stupid that's going to bring us across the nuclear Rubicon, the point of no return. Now, I'm just going to play you a few snippets of this so you can get a sense of the language. And just notice the alacrity they have for this message that they're sharing, the hand gestures. It appears as though they're clearly speaking not only to Vladimir Putin, but the guys who would actually push the button if it came down to that. And they're threatening to eradicate Russia's forces and understand the implications of what these guys are saying. It's very important to understand, and I'm hoping that a lot of people who are in the government understand, that if we make good on this promise to attack Russia if there's a radiological incident, it's Mad Max. Okay, we're talking about a full-blown strategic nuclear exchange. There are certain conditions and situations where you might see a limited nuclear strike, a escalate to de-escalate situation, as it would be called, where one side drops a tactical nuke and it doesn't necessarily immediately elicit the use of a strategic arsenal of the other side. There's some people who believe that when the Russians fire off nukes, they're firing off all of them. There is no such thing as a limited nuclear exchange. I disagree with that. I think that we may well see the normalization of tactical nuclear weapons definitely within our lifetime, possibly this year. So there are circumstances where you can have a limited tactical nuclear exchange where it doesn't necessarily have to graduate to the level of strategic forces. However, if we're talking about threatening to do a full-on attack on Russia, that is a scenario that Russia pushes all the buttons, possibly. Okay, and I say possibly because there's a lot of things that have been catching us off guard throughout this conflict. So let's just listen to a little bit of this, and you can go and watch the entire C-SPAN presentation, and you can tell me what you think.
But we're here to talk about something nobody else seems to want to talk about. I applaud President Biden for putting on the table that the threat of Putin using a nuclear weapon in Ukraine is real. And our message is to those around Putin that if you do this, if you follow his order, if he ever gives it, you can expect a massive response from NATO, and you will be at war with NATO. I can't believe that NATO nations would allow their countries to be irradiated by a nuclear attack emanating in Ukraine.
Understand what he's saying. He's not saying if you attack us. He's saying if there's a nuclear detonation in Ukraine, not even an attack against NATO.
Not to consider that attack on the neighboring country and NATO writ large. So as we go into the 4th of July holiday, people are going to do things at home. They're going to meet with their constituents. They're going to travel. Senator Blumenthal and I want to put everybody in this body and this Congress on notice that the threat of a use of a nuclear device by Russia is real. And the best way to deter it is to give them clarity, the Russians, as to what happens if they do that. They will be in a war with NATO. Thank you.
I tell you guys, that's a profound statement. That's a profound shift in policy for us to say, and I'm not saying that that's necessarily the policy, that's what they're proposing, but for us to say that we would immediately get involved if there was a detonation of a nuclear weapon anywhere in Ukraine, just as a result of the radiological dust cloud, that's incredibly concerning. And this type of language, in light of all this other stuff that's going on, the broader context that I've outlined, should be very concerning to everybody, because these guys are playing with fire. They're playing with all of our lives, and they're clearly trying to send a message to Russia with the hopes that Russia heeds this warning and doesn't proceed too quickly in their counter-offensive operations. Because what they're really saying here is that there's going to be a nuclear incident if we don't have our way, right? And this is why we're getting so close to the moment of truth with respect to how this thing is going to go. Anyways, I'll let Mr. Blumenthal speak.
Let me express my thanks to Senator Graham for his leadership, which has been constant, steadfast, courageous. And this effort has been bipartisan. The reason that we got our legislation or resolution through urging that Russia be declared a state sponsor of terrorism passed unanimously by the United States Senate is because we have been so bipartisan on our legislative efforts, on our trips to Ukraine, where we have seen firsthand.
Look at the body language.
Determination of the Ukrainian people. And now on the battlefield, we are seeing it again. The progress has been slow but steady. If that progress continues, as likely it will, Putin could be tempted to use a tactical nuclear weapon, or
what he means is there probably is no progress, or they're probably not making the progress that they originally wanted to. And this is the veiled threat that there's going to be a radiological incident, and that is going to necessitate the involvement of NATO. You got to read between the lines of what these guys are saying. This is insane.
Just as likely tried to destroy the main nuclear power plant. Both actions would have dire consequences for the health of Ukraine, but also surrounding NATO.
Remember, the nuclear power plant is in one of the annexed territories that Russia controls. They have no incentive to do this, okay? But it's a shame. I actually like Blumenthal because he was one of the people who challenged the 5G stuff. Anyways, let's get back to this.
Nations. Poland is at immediate risk if the use of tactical nuclear weapons or destruction of a nuclear power plant causes radiation to spread, as almost certainly it would, causing significant human harm. This is not a kind of reckless or panicky resolution. It's based on fact and science, and it is meant to send a message to Vladimir Putin and even more directly to his military. Right. They will be destroyed. They will be.
So you heard what he just said. If there's any radiological incident in Ukraine, doesn't matter, if we don't have exact 100% proof that you did it, your army will be destroyed, and you, Vladimir Putin, will be destroyed. My friends, they're planning something. That's all I'm going to say, and all I can say is just keep getting ready. I'm to the point where I don't even know if I want to travel at this point in time, okay? Because I really don't know what they have in store for us. I'm going to leave it there. We're going to come back after I have a few cups of coffee, and we're going to talk about this some more. But please let me know what you think about this in the comments section below. Thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.